Welcome today guys. So today we're going to discuss an important topic of why you should not be using page object model, right? Though you'll find lots of videos over the internet which says like page object model helps you in proper arrangement of your objects. It helps you put your page objects in a separate class file and you can just come to a single place and you can just change all over it again and it will start working. But not many told you like there is literally, you know, a big drawback of this model, right? So till today, maybe in my initial days when I used to design frameworks, I have used page object model as well. But recently, especially in last 2 3 years, I haven't used that. And the reason for it, let me just give you one practical example why page object model is a bad idea. So guys, this one is my skeletal framework from my GitHub. So I have transformed it to use page object model. So if you look over here in my base test, it's a simple thing. We are just going to find an element. So in page object model, what we do is so this is my page object model, which is using page factory class, right? So I'm hoping guys you're aware of these concepts, and there are a lot of videos which actually have been made on this model, claiming that this is actually quite beneficial for your framework. So over here, if you see, first of all, in page object model, we have to use annotations like this is find by, and that is how your XPath would look like. So initially we used to do how equal to how.xpath, but these days they have, I think, improvised it and we can just use now xpath equal to. All right. So this is the first thing that you need to do. And underneath that, you have to specify your web element. So what basically it does is it finds this thing and stores it in this web element. So that's what it do. Now these two lines. Now, in order to interact with this element, right? So obviously once you land on that particular page, at that time you're going to initialize this class, right? Because you know that your page has come up. Now you can find all the elements on that page. So as soon as you make an object of this class, it runs it, and this using this init elements, it finds all the elements on that page. So guys, you have to note this point. As soon as the page appears on the web page, right, on your website, it finds all the element. Over here I had one element. If I would have had over here, let's say 10 elements, it might find all the 10 elements. Okay, and then it stores in the respective web elements, and then you can write subsequent methods. So there are two ways to do that. So one I have done is I have written a method over here. Let's say you want to input something into this search box, right? So this is basically a Google search box. So you open Google and you find that search box, and you can use a method like send keys into that search box and pass a value to it. So this is obviously a web element now. You can use send keys directly on it and you can pass in that value. So in my base test, I have just called that method, right? In order to use that method, I have to make object of this class. And when I make object of this page object class, it accepts the driver as the parameter. So which is over here, the constructor. So as soon as the constructor is called, it initializes the driver, it initializes the element, and as soon as this line of code is run, it basically finds all the element on that page. Okay, so far so good. So now guys, I told you you have to note down the point that as soon as the page load, it finds all the elements. So what does that mean? In today's websites, do you really think that once a page loads, it never changes? If a page load happens in today's website, there are a lot of Ajax component, there are a lot of elements that are loaded much later, right? There are a lot of data that are being fetched and they'll be like, in form of, you can say jQueries or in form of any sort of, asynchronous methods, right? That are being called. So there are a lot of asynchronous calls these days in the websites just to improve the performance of the application. So obviously, since it finds all the element in one go, the most challenging part would be you will have lots of stale element reference exceptions, right? Especially I would say in modern day web pages. Now stale element is an exception that occurs once Selenium finds the element, and when you try to interact with that element, it's not there on the page. So that's when it says it's stale, you know, the element was there, but now it's not there. So the biggest problem with this pattern is you'll have it has like tendency to get into those lot of stale element reference exceptions. So that's one thing, and I've given the reason for it, because as soon as the page load, it just finds all the elements. All right, and when you try to interact with that element, it can go stale. And next thing that comes is dynamic XPaths. Over here, guys, like this is a static XPath. What if my XPath is dynamic? Right, personally, when I design frameworks, my 95% of the XPaths are dynamic. The reason being because I tend to make a framework which is sort of XPathless, right? So like I don't have to find XPath for every element. I'm definitely going to make a video on the best practices that I follow while designing my frameworks. So over here, definitely page object model is a bad idea. Is you cannot handle dynamic XPaths, but then again you have to write maybe 2 or 3 lines of code more in order to handle that dynamic element, which is not a good idea, guys. Don't do that. So that's the second thing, the management part. Now, guys, if you see over here, I have to create a separate class, and then I have to write this, I would say a boilerplate code just to find one element. If the whole concept is around like my all the objects of the page, they can reside in a single class, why can't we use interface? Right over here, if you see, I have to just initialize the class, and then I have to just use that method. And rather than doing all this thing, right, why can't I just directly use it? Like for example, in the same concept, I have created an interface, right? So by default, especially after Java 8, interfaces fields are public, static, and final by default. All right. So this thing is public, static, and final. That's so simple, guys. So if I have to use it, all I have to do is this thing, google.xpath underscore Google search. So since I have imported the class, my class name is also same. That's why it's giving the error. But this is literally what you have to do. A single line. And you use your element. And tomorrow, if your element changes, you know, okay, this is my page where my element is. You're going to come here and you're going to just change it to whatever the new element is. And the same thing we do over here. But we do a lot of other stuff as well, which isn't needed at all, guys. So I don't think like there's any benefit around it, right? When you can do that simple thing in just one line of code. And the last part is, guys, on the memory part, right? Though it doesn't makes that huge amount of difference, but even an iota of difference when you run your code does matters. And I personally feel page object model, it creates a lot of classes, right? And that's the reason, like you talk about, is more memory. In today's world, almost all the projects work in agile, which means like you have shorter sprints, you have shorter releases, right? Maybe in a quarter you might land 3 or 4 releases, right? Can you really afford this page object model, if you have to do a lot of changes around your framework, right? And you have to, because this increases your scripting as well, right? But this thing like is just a single line of code, and this thing, if you have to write it, it is like an overhead on your scripting part as well, which is my fourth point, right? So considering all these things, guys, I don't think page object model you should be using, though there are like, I think, tons of videos that claim use page object model, it helps to do this, because the basic concept around page object model is management, and management I can easily do in form of an interface, right? Or in form of constants as well, right? If you have to create a call class, just create a constant, simple as that. Or you can use an interface like I have done over here. So it's completely on you, but definitely not this thing, right? Thanks a lot. And also I'm going to make another video on why BDD is not an automation tool. Right. So though this entire industry claims like do BDD, do BDD, do make these frameworks, though I have myself personally designed frameworks for my clients, right, on BDD. But again, guys, let's just discuss more in detail in that video. Thank you. Do like and subscribe.